Thanks for joining us at Right On Replicas, where we're proud to bring you the best scale model kit reviews on the planet. This review covers the Northrop Snark SM-62 Intercontinental Guided Missile Kit. It's a 181 scale kit, a vintage unit from Revell that's number 85-7810 in the current catalog. It was originally released in the late 50s and re-released in 2011, but it's still readily available at online auction sites. It's a skill level 2 kit for the intermediate builder and comes with a launch platform and ground crewman. It features a positionable launch ramp with a detailed base, 2 ground figures, and twin jettisonable booster rockets and authentic U.S. Air Force decal markings. It's molded in color with about 30 pieces and includes colorful waterslide decals and instructions. Deployed from 1959 to 1961, the Snark was launched from a platform by 2 solid-fueled rocket booster engines, and then it switched to an internal turbojet engine for the rest of the flight. It had a ceiling of about 55,000 feet and a speed of about 650 miles an hour, with a maximum range of 5,500 nautical miles. It carried a nuclear warhead and used a complicated celestial navigation system. It also had the ability to return for a landing on the skid strip at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station for reuse. Here are the kit's contents. It comes with a nice instruction set and some really great decals, but I strongly suggest that you use some setting solution to help the decals conform to contours. Some of them are a little difficult to place. Also, you may find that we'll be using Model Master liquid cement for most of the construction, and for sometimes we'll also use a little super glue if we need some extra strength. But as always, use the manufacturer's safety and use guidelines whenever you use any of the products that you see or hear mentioned in the review. Get the left and right fuselage halves out of the kit, and notice that on the right half, part number 1, there's some pin marks left there from the molding process. So you'll need to cut those off or sand them off in order to make them less noticeable and smooth out that surface. I use some liquid cement to apply to all of the perimeter of the seams and where the fuselage halves go together, and then I placed them together and then started wrapping them with some rubber bands, and then finally you want to shift and match all of the seams to the best position possible, and then let it set and dry. Now locate the 4 pieces for the booster rockets and sand off the pin marks just like the fuselage halves, and then glue these together and match up the edges so you get the best possible surface. I deviated from the instruction sequence here to assemble the two fuel tanks. That's parts 7 and 8. And you'll need to prep those the same way as the fuselage and the rocket boosters. They've got some pin marks and some flash you may need to sand off and smooth out. If you locate and take a look at the center of the wing, there's a circular feature there that I think may be a fuel port. Anyway, I use a small rotary tool to smooth out the pin mark in the middle of it, and a little filler to make it smooth. And then I glued the fuel pods to the wing assembly. With these main pieces put together, you'll notice that in addition to the pin marks, etc., and flash, there also are, of course, the ubiquitous seams that will need to be filled and addressed. Now, one way to help with that is to put a little masking tape alongside the seam that you're working on to keep from destroying any of the raised rivets and panel lines, and keep that to a minimum. But if you're making a contest build, you'll have to address those at this time. Once you're satisfied with your seam work, apply a couple of nice even coats of sandable primer to the fuselage, wing assembly, and Jada units. Those are the boosters, and give them a light sanding with 1000 grit sandpaper and wipe them clean with a soft cloth, and set them up to paint for the color coat by letting them air dry. Start your color coats with some very light coats, just enough to tack, and then add a little bit more on the second coat. And then add a couple of wet coats until you get a nice even coloration on the whole unit. Now, for this kit, I used Krylon Banner Red. It's just almost a perfect match for the actual color, and it looks good on the main body. Now, let those parts dry overnight at least, and a few days is better if you don't have an accelerator. So go ahead and let that set and get ready for the next section. I painted the pinout tube aluminum color and installed it on the front of the fuselage. Here I noticed what appeared to be an error in the molding. It looks as though the piece that comprises the air scoop, part 5, is basically upside down when matched to the tab that's in the fuselage. So I had to round that out a little bit. That is so I could fit it in there properly in the proper orientation. And as it turns out, that is pretty important because the trailing edge of the air scoop there is mated to one of the decals that goes right up to it. So you have to put that in a proper position and use the box art and the model here to determine exactly where that goes when you remove the D pins there and put it in manually. The decals are the key to a great looking model here. They actually fit pretty well overall, but there are some adjustments that you may have to make, and if you follow the instructions, they show pretty well exactly where the decals go. So take your time, use plenty of warm water, and use that also for placement, not just to get them off the backing, but then smooth them out and use some decal setting solution to make them conform to the contours of the body. In my kit, the base for the launch pad was a little bit warped, and it has a few challenges to make it look competitive if you're building this for contests. For the purposes of a diorama, you might be better off to actually scratch build the metal rails. And to use it, you should fill some of the ink marks that I show here in white circles, and then remove the nib and the center ring, the white arrow, and then sand off the nameplate decal locator. Alternatively, you could cut off the release latch, the feature between the white circles, and lay down a piece of thin sheet stock to cover most of the molding issues and replace the latch. Then after you decide what to do with that piece, spray it a medium gray. You should also be aware that I used the suggested paint scheme here for the entire model, and I've seen museum pieces where the Snark itself was all white, but that's up to you. Use your historical references to paint and detail the kit as you see fit. I just used what was in the kit suggestion for this one. After the gray paint had dried, I painted the portions you see taped off here, the metal, like the aluminum rails and steel rails, with a silver color in order to make them appear more realistic. Assemble the two halves of the fueling tank as you see here, and then smooth out the seam with some sand sticks and some putty. The fueling tank here, like you see, with a gray finish to match the launch base, and then some details can be added to the front panel. I painted the inset black and some of the knobs there silver, and then add the decals at this point to avoid having to manipulate them into position after they've been obstructed by the rest of the launch pad. I painted the parts on the trees for the launch pad. You can paint most of them except for the connection points and then touch those up afterwards. They could have been sprayed with primer first because it took a couple of extra coats, but it did work out with a dark yellow Tester's bottle paint to get a nice good yellow coloration for the launch pad. Now you can add the tank, the ladder, the platform, and the rails there to complete step 5 for the launch pad. I also detailed the launch latch with some black paint. I added some detail to the launcher bearing support panel. That's part number 24. Using a toothpick and to highlight the dial gauges with some silver paint. Or you could use gauge decals from the aftermarket to make them appear even more functional. Now you can assemble the pieces of the launch frame according to the instructions, but they're very nice, and everything is positively appointed so that it fits into the positions and glues in properly. Just make sure that you scrape off any paint that may be on the gluing surfaces to make sure that you get a good a bond with the plastic. Install the launch frame to the platform, and as you see here, this is the completed launch assembly when you're done, and add the decals to the uprights there as well for a finished look. Now you can apply the decals to the fuselage and tail fin, etc. And don't be afraid to use plenty of warm water and lots of patience to get them into position. Once they're in position, go ahead and coat them with some of that solvent to make sure that they conform to the body of the fuselage. Now we've left the wing off here so that it's easier to put the decals into position. But once those are dry overnight, you can glue the top wing into position on the fuselage there. And once that's set, go ahead and give the entire kit a coat of light clear paint. So you can add the figures if you like or not, it's up to you. I painted the technician that's kneeling down in a white uniform, and the inspecting Army official there, or Air Force official, I guess, at the time, in a medium blue. So put those into position, and well, there you have it. You're done. And this delightful subject matter kit, which is a reminder of that Cold War era, also reminds us of how much money we spent for security. This was only deployed for 3 years and gave way to the intercontinental ballistic missile system. But it was a stopgap measure, and the U.S. felt it was needed for national security. But when you're done, it's a really nice looking kit. You can do a lot to make this improved. Some seam work and even some weathering would help, but it's up to you to finish it the way you like. Nonetheless, I think that if I were you, I'd go out and buy one and put it on my shelf. Well, we hope you like this premium step-by-step model kit review. And so that you don't miss any more, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. But you can always find us on Facebook and our website, rightonreplicas.com. Thanks!